Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm putting out a complete guide on how to play Protection Warrior in patch 8.2, including going over all the new stuff that's been added in the patch. I'll start out this video by covering the pros and cons of Warrior, then move on to how to play, spec, and gear, finally finishing up with 8.2's new Essence system. If you already have a good handle on the class and just want a refresher, there will be a table of contents in the video description so that you can quickly skip to the section you're looking for. If you want even more detail on Protection Warrior or Brewmaster Monk, check out the class guides I've written for Wowhead on either spec, or both. I'll start with the important changes to Protection Warrior in this patch, of which there is a grand total of 1. Unstoppable Force has had its increase to Thunderclap's damage reduced significantly. This is a 35% reduction to Thunderclap's total damage while Avatar is active. Don't worry. The sky is not falling, and Warrior probably will still be the strongest damage dealing tank thanks to Vision of Perfection, which I'll cover in more detail in the Essence section. So now let's get into the good stuff about Protection Warrior. The class deals an incredible amount of AoE damage. They've been the best tank by far in terms of damage during patch 8.1, and while they are receiving about a 35% total nerf to Thunderclap's damage during Avatar, that should still leave them around the top of the pack. And that's before you factor in the amazing new Essence powers they're getting in 8.2. Speaking of that, Warriors are getting what is clearly one of the biggest boosts from the new Essence system, and it's going to dramatically increase the uptime on Avatar, the offensive cooldown that's made the class so immensely powerful and popular. On top of their offenses, Warriors have an excellent collection of defensive cooldowns. Shield Wall, Last Stand, Rallying Cry, Demoralizing Shout, and Spell Reflection. Even Avatar is a decent defensive cooldown with the right Azerite traits. Protection Warriors are also pretty mobile. Heroic Leap is an amazing mobility skill, and Intercept is nice as well. Protection Warriors have a really strong active mitigation in Shield Block that rewards skillful play, and a really satisfying resource system in Rage. And with that, let's jump to the cons. Shield Block is extremely powerful, but Protection Warriors are pretty vulnerable when it isn't active. That means that when you make mistakes, the game is a lot less forgiving to Warriors than it is to some other classes. Cooldown management is a crucial skill for Protection Warriors, and while the class is generally really sturdy once you've mastered it, it does have a steeper learning curve than some of the simpler tanks like Monk, Druid, and DK. But that's about it. Warrior is really great, and one of the most rewarding classes to play once you have a good handle on it. So now let's quickly go over talents. Here is a one-size-fits-almost-all talent setup. In the first tier, Into the Fray is better than Punish in most scenarios. If you somehow wind up with only one stack of Into the Fray, then Punish may be a better option, but because Into the Fray scales off of allies as well as enemies, the cases for that are pretty rare. Impending Victory is terrible for regular tanking at max level, but I have found it pretty useful at times when leveling Warriors. Warrior is my preferred class for leveling up to 110 to unlock allied race armor sets, so I have some experience in this regard. The second tier is largely about user preference. If you really need some mobility, Bounding Stride is pretty useful. Otherwise, Crackling Thunder is better as an all-purpose AoE increase. It helps with tagging mobs while they're moving around, and can potentially be a decent DPS increase in AoE as a result. The third tier is a real one-choice tier. There's absolutely zero reason to ever spec out of Unstoppable Force. Don't even look at the other options, just keep moving. Tier 4 is almost the same thing. Bolster turns Last Stand from a good defensive cooldown into absolutely the best cooldown in the class's arsenal. It effectively grants 15 seconds of shield block, allowing you to recharge an entire shield block charge, while also being totally safe from auto attack damage. It's a huge deal. Indomitable could theoretically be better for a brand new player who isn't comfortable using Last Stand, or for an experienced player who's trying to survive a massive amount of spell damage, but I'd still recommend Bolster even in those situations. The cooldown reduction on Last Stand is really good in the hands of a skilled player, and if you're going to learn to play a class, you might as well learn to play it the right way, right? In Tier 5, Stormbolt and Rumbling Earth are both valid options. I prefer Stormbolt since it's an additional keybind, and that's worth slightly more utility in group situations, but if you want to keep it simple, Rumbling Earth is okay. In the 6th tier, Booming Voice is the go-to option for maximizing DPS and defenses, and you'll want to go with Demoralizing Shout on cooldown if you're spec'd into it, since it is both a nice rage generator and a pretty decent offensive cooldown. You should generally try to line it up with Avatar to maximize your damage. Devastator is a useful talent for maximizing your single target DPS, and it's absolutely worth using over Booming Voice in pure single target scenarios. It's not a humongous gain, but it is enough to justify taking if you're really trying to pump max damage. The last tier is another one-choice tier. Anger Management is a nuclear bomb, and the other two options are squirt guns. There's never a scenario where Anger Management isn't amazing. It's a defining aspect of the class, and probably something Blizzard should look into making baseline come patch 9.0. Alright, time to get down to the nuts and bolts of how to play the class. To start, Protection Warrior has two different playstyles depending on whether Avatar is or is not active. The difference isn't huge, but it is important. For single target when Avatar isn't active, the ability priority is very simple. Shield Slam, Thunderclap, Devastate. You can use Revenge in place of Devastate whenever Revenge is free from parrying an enemy, or when you have enough rage to justify spending it. Basically, as long as casting Revenge won't leave you too rage-starved to cast an important shield block or ignore pain, feel free to use it in place of Devastate. This is true for warriors at all times in single target and in AoE. In AoE, when Avatar is inactive, the priority is a bit different. Thunderclap is your highest damage ability, followed by Revenge, then Shield Slam, and finally Devastate. That doesn't necessarily mean you always have to use the abilities in that order, it will just come down to how much you can afford to Revenge, but you should always try to prioritize Thunderclap in AoE, then try to cast the rest of your skills. During Avatar, Thunderclap is number 1 on your priority list in both AoE and single target, and it will be available every other GCD. So basically, your rotation, whether you're in single target or AoE, could go something like this. Thunderclap, Shield Slam, Thunderclap, Revenge, Thunderclap, Revenge, Thunderclap, and so on. There have been plenty of times in AoE in which my rotation has literally just been Thunderclap, Revenge, repeat for 10 seconds or more. Shield Slam is a better skill than Revenge in single target, but in AoE, unless you need Rage, you should prioritize Revenge ahead of Shield Slam to maximize your damage output. The most important thing about a Protection Warrior's offense is that Devastate is your filler skill, so it should always come last. As long as you're not devastating instead of casting Shield Slam, Thunderclap, and free or affordable Revenges, you'll be alright. Now for defense. Maintaining shield block whenever you're actively tanking is critical to your survival. Shield block is a dramatically more important part of your defensive toolkit than Ignore Pain, and it will significantly reduce your damage taken while it's active. Ignore Pain's not a bad skill, it's just a simple absorb that eats up a significant chunk of rage. It's not nearly as efficient as shield block at reducing damage, and it's more expensive, so it should always be your second line of defense. In terms of cooldowns, Warrior has a lot of them. You should try to use Demoralizing Shout as much as possible since it's also an offensive cooldown. And you should try to use Avatar as much as possible, preferably lined up with Demoralizing Shout. For defensive cooldowns, Shield Wall is your best tool for reducing huge chunks of damage from boss abilities, enraged mobs, heavily bolstered trash packs in Mythic Plus, and so on, anything that's dangerous. Last Stand is arguably better at reducing blockable damage and is another extremely powerful all-around defensive cooldown. Rallying Cry is a raid cooldown that can absolutely be useful as a personal health boost in a pinch. And finally, Spell Reflection is a really powerful piece of defensive utility. At its worst, it's a decent chunk of spell damage reduction. But at its best, it can be used to prevent boss debuff applications or reflect humongous chunks of damage back at bosses in Mythic Plus and in raids. Now let's move on to gearing. Here's the secondary stat priority for Protection Warriors. The rule of thumb for gear upgrades is pretty simple. Item level is more important than stat budget on armor. If an item is a 5 item level upgrade, it's probably worth wearing even if the secondary stats are worse. If you want to be sure, Using the Simulation Craft add-on in raidbots.com is extremely helpful, and I can't recommend it highly enough. This will only help you nail down what maximizes your DPS, but that's okay. Generally speaking, going for the highest total item level is what will maximize your defenses in this expansion. The only exceptions to this are rings and trinkets. Trinkets are very different pieces of gear that need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and because rings don't have strength or armor, you should just try to wear rings that give you as much haste on them as possible. Just be sure you're not giving up a significant amount of item level to do it. Haste is the best stat for protection warriors by a pretty decent margin. It increases your rage generation, reduces your GCD and the cooldowns on shield slam and shield block. It's pretty great. Even though strength is listed as the worst stat, it's not that far behind the rest of the pack. It gives you attack power and armor, and there's nothing wrong with that. The other three stats, they're all fine. Just get item level, basically. Now while we're still on the subject of gear, let's move on to Azerite traits. Let me first start off by saying that while Gem Hide is okay, it has dropped off in terms of overall defensive power, just as a result of item levels rising through the expansion. Rather than cover all of the traits Prot Warrior has available, let me go over the good ones and just offer up a blanket statement that the rest of them aren't very good. First and foremost, Bastion of Might provides a humongous amount of mastery while Avatar is active, and it will significantly increase your damage output while also turning Avatar into a very decent defensive cooldown. It's a great trait, and you should absolutely try to get 3 points in it if possible. Deafening Crash is another must-have trait. It adds a decent chunk of damage to Thunderclap, but also causes it to extend your demoralizing shout by up to 6 seconds. That's fantastic, and a trait you absolutely want to put at least 1 point into. There's nothing wrong with going for a full 3 points, although it will only add a decent chunk of damage after that first point. Deafening Crash is available on the Engineering Helm, which is a great Azerite piece. Engineering is a great profession. I can't recommend it highly enough. That's kind of it. There are some other okay options like Callous Reprisal, but all of the Protection Warrior specific traits really pale in comparison to Bastion of Might and Deafening Crash. If you can't just pick up Bastion of Might and Deafening Crash in every single slot, damage and stat proc traits are not a bad way to go. This holds true in the second ring, where there are a few decent defensive traits and some good stat traits, but Heed My Call and Gut Ripper are the best traits for dealing damage, no question. In the inner ring, there are only 2 traits that are particularly good. Gem Hide is still a decent boost to your damage reduction through armor, which is good, and Impassive Visage is a really versatile, reliable trickle of self-healing. Neither of them is crucial, but they are both nice if you can get them. Now let's move on to trinkets. First off, the Diamond Lace Refracting Prism from Opulence is the only good defense-first trinket in BFA. I don't know why the rest of them are all so bad, but they are, and this one's still good. Its Absorb Shield scales with haste and versatility. Now the thing to remember when wearing defensive trinkets is that you can't kill a boss by reducing its damage, so unless you're taking something that really threatens to kill you, you probably should wear something that provides extra damage instead. If you do really need that defense though, this trinket rules. As far as providing extra damage, there are plenty of good options available from Mythic Plus. Because Protection Warriors have such powerful offensive cooldowns, they tend to favor stat proc trinkets over damage proc trinkets when trying to maximize DPS. This is also a function of most of the damage proc trinkets coming from Mythic Plus not being that great for strength users. But a nice side effect of this is that the stat proc trinkets from Mythic Plus are much better defensively than pure damage trinkets. The best stat trinkets from Mythic Plus are Razan's Gleaming Eye from Ataldazar, the Vial of Animated Blood from the Underrot, and Gore-Crusted Butcher's Block from Wakecrest Manor. The Alchemy trinket is also fairly decent. Now, finally, let's get to Essences, the new Heart of Azeroth system being added in patch 8.2. We previously made a video detailing how that system will work, so if you want more info on that, go check it out. So let's just jump directly into breaking down the new essences and pointing out what I think will be the good, the bad, and the ugly of this system. Let's start with the very first trait you get from this system, Crucible of Flame. It's a super basic power. It deals increasing damage or healing to a single target. That's it. Again, it's very basic, but it could wind up reasonably being a good option for dealing damage. There really only appears to be one other competitor for the max damage throne, Vision of Perfection, which I'll get to next. This one is a lot more straightforward, but also does look a lot weaker than Vision. In any case, it's very easy to level up. Just level up your neck and complete the quests that pop up, and you'll get your new ranks of Crucible of Flame. Alright, here's what we've all been waiting for, Vision of Perfection. This is probably going to be a class-defining power for Protection Warriors for the rest of BFA, and there's nothing wrong with that. It grants you a chance to randomly activate Avatar along with a small haste proc whenever that happens. It also reduces the cooldown of Avatar by 13% and causes it to heal you for 5% of your health whenever you use Avatar or Vision of Perfection randomly triggers. This is a humongous increase to Avatar's uptime, pushing warriors from roughly 40% uptime on Avatar in ideal conditions into the range of more like 60% uptime. Yeesh. Even with the nerf to Unstoppable Force, Warrior is still going to be good. Alright, now onto another basic essence, World Vein Resonance. This essence basically gives you some extra strength, and all you have to do is stay within 8 yards of a thing on the ground. That risk-reward ratio is not good. Thanks, I hate it. Ripple in Space is a weird delayed teleport that deals damage. Not to be unfairly hard on it, but I have zero idea when anyone would ever intentionally use this in PvE. Memory of Lucid Dreams grants you extra rage generation, and the minor power is a 15% chance to return 50% of any rage you spend. Rage is a really valuable resource for warriors, and just on paper the minor is worth 7.5% more of it. That's very good just on its own, and it synergizes nicely with anger management. The major power, on the other hand, is not good. You just have to give up too much for it, and rage generation isn't really the kind of thing you want in huge bursts anyways. You just want more all the time. Conflict and Strife is the last of the role-agnostic Azerite Essences, and it comes from rated PvP. This unfortunately means that it won't be available until the next season of WoW PvP starts, 2 weeks after the patch launch occurs. For Protection Warriors, it grants Thunderstruck, which roots enemies hit by Thunderclap. This could be useful for kiting mobs, especially in Mythic Plus, but you will want to be careful with it since enemies that are rooted out of melee range from the tank have a tendency to turn toward anyone who's in melee range and just wallop them. So you can use this essence in Mythic Plus to kite, or to kill your melee DPS. Sphere of Suppression is another Mythic Plus kiting essence I'll touch on in a few moments that I think will wind up doing this same job, but better. Now, onto the tank-specific essences. Azeroth's Undying Gift is a very simple defensive cooldown. It comes from the new Eternal Palace raid, so it won't be available for the first 2 weeks of patch 8.2. This power isn't amazing, but if you really find yourself needing another defensive cooldown in raids, this is the best option offered by Essence Powers. Anima of Life and Death is sort of the third place finisher among the DPS essences. It's a pretty long cooldown for an AoE damage skill, and the healing and max health it provides are nice, but not a huge deal. I like this power, but given the competition it's going to be up against, I don't think it's going to see a lot of use from Protection Warriors. It also will not be available until Mythic Dungeon Season 3 starts, 2 weeks after the patch goes out. Aegis of the Deep is up next, and it is not a good essence. It has been buffed while I've been working on this video, and I would not be surprised to see more buffs in the future, but flat damage reduction is just not a great design in general. You really need to be taking a lot of small hits for it to have much impact. Protection Warriors do have huge armor values, as well as block, so this can be somewhat better for them than it is for, say, monks or demon hunters, for example. But overall, this stands to only be a 15 to 30% damage reduction cooldown under normal circumstances, and it's on the global cooldown. It's just not very good. Nullification Dynamo has a decent minor power. It's not crazy, but it is very good if you need magic damage mitigation. The major power, however, is undertuned, the cooldown is hilariously long, and it's on the global cooldown, which is not great. And finally, last but not least among the tank essences, Sphere of Suppression. This has been radically revamped since earlier in the PTR when it was the most overpowered tank bonus we've ever seen, and that's kind of a shame. Now the minor power grants a reactive slow and a small boost to haste and movement speed. It's not a huge deal, but it is decent. The 25% attack speed slow can be a useful defensive cooldown in Mythic Plus, and I definitely think this can get some use as a powerful kiting tool for high-level Mythic Plus dungeons. Whether the attack speed slow will work on bosses in Azjar's Eternal Palace is uncertain, but if it does, it might be worth using in raids as well. This essence is earned from unrated PvP. As such, I'm not sure whether it'll be available until the new PvP season launches, 2 weeks after the patch goes out, or if it'll be available day one. I'm just not sure. So just to recap, Vision of Perfection is the standout number 1 for Protection Warriors, and it'll probably be a set it and forget it kind of choice. Memory of Lucid Dreams as minor power is also very appealing, but the major power is not really that interesting. If you find yourself needing an extra defensive cooldown, Azeroth's Undying Gift is basically the only major defensive power that's definitely going to be good in raids. Sphere of Suppression will be useful for kiting in Mythic dungeons and could be good in raids, and Nullification Dynamo's minor power looks decent all of the time, but its major power is not that good. Everything else looks kind of unappealing. Well, I think that about covers it. If you have any questions about Protection Warrior, ask away. With Azjar's Eternal Palace and Mythic Dungeon Season 3 coming soon, we have some cool ideas for videos to do, but if there's anything you'd like to see, we'd love to know. Stay tuned for more Patch 8.2 content, and as always, blah blah blah, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye.